Good afternoon. I'm Emma Munbode from the Mirror's Money section, and thank you for joining us in the latest of our Cost of Living Here to Help series. Today we're tackling fuel prices after petrol and diesel both reached record highs in the past week. It now costs around £1.50 a litre to fill up your tank. In short, that means it's around £81 to fill up a family car. And unfortunately, prices are looking like they might rise more in the coming months as global demand continues to rise after the pandemic and tensions remain between Russia and Ukraine, which could potentially threaten our supplies here in the UK. I'm joined by Martin James of complaints website resolver.co.uk today, who will be sharing some insider tips on how to save on petrol over the next half an hour. Have you got a tip to share? Drop us a line in the comment section below to share it. And if you've got a question, again, drop it in the comment section below, and we'll try and answer them over the next 20 to 30 minutes. So over to you, Martin. As our expert in this area, what would you say are the biggest tips you give to drivers who are trying to tackle these prices at a time when literally everything is going up in price?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's lovely to be talking as opposed to kind of just appearing in your column. So thank you very much for having me on. I'm going to be very honest with drivers first and foremost. I would love to have some wonderful tips that will solve all of your problems, particularly if you need your car or your van, for business purposes. I simply don't have an answer to that all-important question: when are the prices going to come down? I have to be honest, realistically, they're not going to come down for the foreseeable future. So most of the tips that we're going to be using and talking about are all about energy conservation, about how to make sure that your vehicle goes much further on much less. And there's a range of things that you can do. Obviously, none of these situations are ideal for everybody. I was speaking to a van driver recently who regularly does, 800 miles a week. He was basically saying, well, how do I solve this problem? And unfortunately, if you are in that position, then, drastic measures are needed. You might have to focus on local business. But let's not go for the drama stuff. First things first, there's some really, really important things that you can that are really quite straightforward to do. First of all, a heavy vehicle is a more expensive to run vehicle. The car or the van or the motorbike has to work a lot harder if the car or vehicle is fuller. Let's just say vehicle for the rest of the program. And that basically means that if you fill your petrol tank right the way to the top, then it's going to be more expensive to run. And this can also have an impact on things like, the amount of stuff you've got lying around in your boot. There are things like taking your roof rack off your car, which actually applies drag and can also make your car less fuel efficient. So there's a range of tips that we can talk about like that.
So what would you say in terms of filling up your tank to the maximum level? Would you say just go for a quarter or just kind of fill up as you go along?
Well, I would say just don't fill up your tank to the top. You fill it halfway, fill it 3/4 of the way. Halfway is probably best to get the most fuel efficiency, according to the experts I've spoken to from the various road networks and vehicle manufacturers. Now, Emma, you wrote in your column way back earlier on when we had the panic in the pumps, which wasn't so long ago, when we were talking about people who were queuing up and desperately trying to get hold of the petrol. Those memories are still quite fresh, I think, for lots of us in our minds. So it is really a worry. You do think, well, what if there's another kind of like mad stampede for petrol? We're not having that rush at the moment. There is petrol available. It's just ridiculously expensive. So try to resist the urge to just fill your tank up on the off chance that you might not get a chance again. In fact, one of the best things that we can do in this day and age is be a lot more savvy about where to buy the petrol from. And there are lots of ways you can do that. We've talked previously on in the Money Matters pages on the Mirror about, where do you get the cheapest petrol from? This is quite challenging at the moment, but as you mentioned at the start of the show, the supermarkets, when we've done kind of tests and looked into kind of, just who's offering the best prices at any given time, the supermarkets are offering marginally better prices. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the best price wherever, but there are lots of different franchises when it comes to petrol stations as well. So just because a brand is offering one price, as drivers will know, you're often paying much higher elsewhere. So what I tend to do is go onto your local groups, have a look at the ones in your area. There'll be your neighbours, there'll be local people offering tips about which petrol station has the best price. So have a look at those if you can afford to drive around a little bit to get a better deal. But if not, maybe a supermarket's the best option for now.
Yeah. And are there any sort of particular areas that people should be avoiding or targeting? I know experts like the RAC and the AA do always suggest avoiding really, really quiet areas, just because there's going to be less petrol stations, which basically means there's less competition. And so if there's less competition, the prices are likely to be, they've got the monopoly in that area, so their prices are likely to be as high as they can take it, if that makes sense.
That's right.
So should you be focusing, should you be targeting areas where there's lots of supermarkets and where there's lots of houses and lots of drivers, or would you say all supermarkets are the same, are charging the same prices across the board?
Well, I spoke to some researchers just last week who looked at the petrol prices around the UK, and yeah, as I said, unfortunately, there wasn't really much in it. Now, if anyone's watching from Northern Ireland, you will be pleased to know that Northern Ireland is the cheapest place at the moment to fill up your tank. People living in the capital and the southeast, not very surprising, it's more expensive, and that's down to demand and simply availability. It's not there aren't that many petrol stations in the centre or in the rough area of London, and it's only when you start to go out that you get more options. So I think the basic thing is, as you say, Emma, if there's only one petrol station in town, that's going to be a franchise and it's got a captive audience, and that means that they may well set their price higher. So always have a look. You can go on to kind of GPS systems, you can have a look at maps online. There's a ton of websites for free where you can have a look at the various petrol stations in your area, but you can't beat local knowledge. And that's often where, if anyone's ever had a gossip, you'll find out that that's information passes very, very quickly amongst your neighbours. But that's often where you'll find on those local community groups, and again, there's loads of free apps and websites in your local areas. That's usually where you get the best tips for the prices. But again, it's only about 4 to 5p at the moment in terms of the savings that you can make. So it's a small amount, but if you're regularly using your car, then every penny adds up at the moment.
Mm-hmm. One website I found to be quite helpful when I'm writing articles and kind of working out where people should be shopping right now is a website called petrolprices.com, which you might be familiar with. It basically allows you to put your postcode in or the town that you're in, and it will tell you what the rates are at the forecourts around your postcode, basically. So if you're looking for the cheapest places to buy and you can't actually find any Facebook groups or local community groups to help you work out where to target your spending, then petrol prices might be one to try. Alongside obviously comparing your local supermarkets and just seeing what's available. And obviously if you're going to your supermarket, remember to take your loyalty club cards as well. Tesco, Nexacard, they're both brilliant for accumulating points while you're spending. And if it's money you would have spent anyway and you're getting the most competitive price because you're going to the cheapest place in your area, then it's a win-win, because you get points to spend on your future shops.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, so much. I actually nicked your tip about petrol.co.uk just for some of the programs where I've been talking about this on the telly. So yes, it's such a good tip. I stole it. And it's a really, really good website. It helps you kind of get an idea of what the best deals are in your area. But again, as you said there, Emma, the loyalty cards, and it's not just with the supermarkets. Some of the big brands have them as well. You can basically get, if you're a regular user, you can actually save a little bit more money than you would have done ordinarily. So look into those. If you're not already signed up, it's definitely worthwhile considering.
Brilliant. And in terms of driving itself, are there any tips that you'd give to drivers in terms of like bad driving habits that they should probably be a bit more mindful of as all these prices start to rise, just to make sure they're not draining it unnecessarily?
Do you know, this is my sister is loving this at the moment in many ways, actually, because my sister is a very sensible driver, and when we were younger, she used to drive my father mad because she'd sit at the back of the car watching the speedometer. And now, of course, she's having a whale of a time because her style of driving is actually the one that's the most beneficial. If you do kind of stick to the speed limits and go easier on the accelerator, you are going to conserve more of your petrol. You're going to get more for your money, basically. So it's a tricky driving, the fast accelerating, all of the various other kind of poor driving things can actually have a big impact on you as well. The same goes for all of kind of the various things that you can use within your car. Having the air conditioning blasting, obviously that's applicable today or indeed this week. But it's the same with having the heating on as well. All of these things are working off that central engine, and this will have an impact on how quickly you burn through your energy and fuel efficiency as well. So anything that you're basically turning on in the car or using or making regular use of every time that you're revving that engine, it's also a good idea as well, if you are stuck in traffic and your car isn't too old, so you're worried about it restarting, is to actually, if you leave the engine idling as well, that can have an impact too. But, there is a wider crisis here. And I know that lots of people will be watching this and thinking, well, these tips aren't just practical. We have a much bigger issue here. And you're right, we do. There is a much wider global problem around petrol and indeed the energy crisis as well. And it is something that needs to be addressed. So the government are going to have to look into these situations as well, particularly for people with businesses. I'm really concerned about people with smaller businesses who may not know kind of what the options are that are available to them. And it's worthwhile saying as well, again, it's not an ideal solution, but if people are now thinking about going green or going for an electric car, there are grants, for example, for van drivers where you could potentially get a grant towards buying an electric vehicle. But for many people, this just isn't going to be an option because they are still very expensive.
Well, on the expensive note, Dale's just made a really, really good point. From today until the 27th of February, customers at Morrison's can get 7p off every litre of fuel when they spend £40 in store. So that's a brilliant tip there. If you're heading to your local Morrison store this weekend and doing your shopping, the coupon can be redeemed from today until Sunday, March the 6th. So even though the deal expires 27th of February, you still have time to use it up until the first week of March. And it means with unleaded at around £1.50 a litre right now, it means you could actually get it down to around £1.43, which, like I said, every penny counts. So if you're looking to save money, and supermarkets are one of the cheapest places to buy in your area, and Morrison's is showing a competitive price for your food shop, then it might be worth targeting that place over the next couple of weeks just to get a little extra saving on every litre that you try and top up.
Yeah, there's some fantastic tips coming in actually, and I really would say to people, this is where we all kind of we work so well as a community. I can see that Sean's just got a great tip as well about petrolprices.com, which I'll let Emma cover. But these tips are so helpful because by working together we can all help each other save a little bit of cash. And sometimes a lot of the tips kind of they change very, very quickly. So by the time we've written about them, or by the time you read about them in the paper, a couple of days later, the deal might have vanished. So actually, if we all work together and keep sharing these tips, it's a great, great way to actually get this information out there. So keep them coming.
And like you said, it helps build that community where obviously this isn't an isolated situation. It's across the country. The prices are rising on everything right now. So we're all trying to save money and trying to kind of combat this cost of living crisis. So like I said, if you've got any tips that you want to share with other listeners, then just pop them in the comment section below, just like Sean's just done on his tip on petrolprices.com, which he says helps him on his commute, which is around 120 miles a week. On top of that, he's using his Tesco Club card and to collect points as much as he can, which means accumulating lots of points to spend on your future food shops. So just little tips like that, I think, can make a big difference. But I think the key thing here is to just make sure you're not just going to that supermarket because you've got a club card or you're a member of the loyalty scheme. You need to actually check the prices and just make sure it's the best place to top up in your area first and foremost. So not just going there just because you can get a little extra discount here and there, because supermarkets make their money out of you because they know in forecourts, because they know that they're going to make they're going to make a killing out of you on the food shop front. So you're going to go there, you're going to buy your big shop, and then they're going to get an extra 30 quid out of you while you're topping up on the way out of the supermarket, basically. So don't fall into that trap. Just make sure the rates are right and the litre, how much is just make sure its prices are as competitive as possible for your budget before you just agree to shop there just because you've got a loyalty club.
Oh, that's such a good point, Emma. I mean, yes, because you're right. You're a captive audience. Once you're there, you're in the car park, we always need to buy something that we're running out of. So yeah, supermarkets they're not doing this for charity. And of course, where you know how competitive it is for buying, you know, lots of essentials like milk and bread. They will cut the prices to take out the competition if they can do. Now, the fact that, you know, we're still kind of seeing quite a lot of similarity between those prices shows you just how dire the situation is. But given that, you know, we've currently hit 151, 152 for a tank of petrol, you know, getting it down to 142 is a really really good thing. I should say as well, you know, I've made one of those fatal mistakes the other day. Sometimes when I go on the telly, I've got about 2 minutes to cover things. And I was asked recently to cover where the supermarket petrol was the same or it was of lower quality than those of kind of the big brand names. And I had to summarize it a bit and say it was an urban myth. And all hell broke loose. I got so many angry messages from drivers and indeed from the big brands. So just to kind of, if anyone is wondering about that kind of, that whole, is it an urban myth about where the supermarket petrol is of lower quality? That is an urban myth. It's not of low quality. There's a set standard for petrol that has to apply across the board. The reason why you might pay a little bit more at, you know, Esso, one of the other big petrol stations, is because they have additives they put in for energy efficiency and other little things that they add as well. So you don't get a lower quality of petrol at supermarkets. But some of the bigger brands that charge more may add things to actually help fuel efficiency. Once we go into kind of how efficient that is, you've lost me. You'd have to speak to a motoring expert there on that one. But just to tackle that urban myth, it is kind of true. But then, you know, you might still, if you've got like a high performance vehicle, you might get something out of using one of the more expensive petrols.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of myths, are airports and busy motorway service stations generally the most expensive places to top up, or would you say that's a myth?
They are, yes. Motorway service stations, you know, I do love it every time the Mirror does, which is the worst motorway service station, because everyone has an opinion on them. It's a little bit like, if you think of kind of a service station the same way as you would think of a shop, you know, if you know this, if you go into a train station or if you go into an airport, you are going to pay a lot more money for basic goods. I'm one of those terrible smokers. I must stop. But I can generally judge things by how much it costs me to buy a packet of cigarettes. And it can be jaw-dropping in airports or train stations. And the same goes for service stations as well. You're a captive audience. There aren't many options. You pay more for coffee and you'll pay more for the petrol.
Brilliant. That's really handy to know in terms of places you should definitely avoid. And one other tip that my readers always tell me about is sharing journeys, like sharing their car journeys. So while on the one side you can't actually you can't always control how far petrol prices are rising. You can be really smart with where you're spending your money, but sometimes it really is out of your hands. But there are small things you can do in your own little communities or with work colleagues or with friends and family and neighbours that can help you cut back on spending. And one of those is sharing journeys. So if you work with a colleague and you can pick them up on your way into the office, now that we're all working back in, a lot of us are working back in offices, then you can pick them up on the way and split that ride. And that could, you know, you could split the entire cost of your tank if you do that for an entire week. So that might be a clever, thrifty way to save a few pounds if it's possible.
Yeah, I love the idea. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. I mean, we all love the comedy show, let's face it. But it is a great idea. And yes, I know that might not seem like a practical solution long term, but actually, right now, you know, many people are just going back into the office 2 days a week. And so, if that's the case, then, you know, why not kind of make friends with a colleague and see what you can do to actually carpool or car share. If you want to get rid of the car completely, there are many kind of car services where you can just hire a car for a specific amount of time and just use it for when you're traveling around as well. And if you really want to go the full hog and go back onto public transport, which is not as busy as it used to be, but still massively underfunded, I'm sorry to say, then there are lots of schemes for people who might want to start cycling. Many employers have kind of the cycle to work scheme, which gives you grants to get a bike and things along those lines. Again, I know this doesn't work for everyone, and if you do need a vehicle because you're a contractor or a builder, or it's essential for what you're doing, these aren't necessarily going to be practical solutions, but there are ways that you can actually save money. And I think that, you know, facing the year that we're going to be facing, get creative and see what you can do to actually cut those prices down by carpooling and things like that.
Yeah, carpooling is brilliant. And another one, going back to driving habits as well, which is a really valid point that we feature a lot in a lot of our stories, is driving in the highest gear possible. So obviously stick within the speed limit. We're not asking you to go in speed, but constantly changing your gear can rinse out your fuel and can end up obviously emptying your tank quicker than it needs to be emptied. So the general rule, which the RAC and the AA usually follow, is to drive in the highest gear possible within the speed limit for where you're driving. Excessive speed and then constantly changing your gears and accelerating and then slowing down basically can just kind of unnecessarily drain your tank, and then you have to fill up again. So that's one thing to bear in mind while you're on the road. Stopping and starting where possible, and try and maintain the same speed, just to avoid just rinsing out your fuel tank for no reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that this has shown me is, you know, Emma and I are basically going to be working very hard this year, because it's not just about the tips that we've got now. We're going to keep researching and looking into things to find out more about kind of the best ways that you can save money. So as we find things out, we'll talk to you as well. And, you know, in the columns and in the Mirror Online, we'll be covering your questions about, you know, some of these trickier problems as they emerge. So yes, there's so much more that we need to kind of find out in terms of what the future holds for us, but we'll be right there coming up with answers for you wherever we can.
Okay, brilliant. Well, that's been really helpful, Martin. Thank you for joining us today on today's show. Like I said, we'll be doing a cost of living live series, a live episode every Thursday at 1 p.m. right here on the Mirror's Facebook page. So if you want to drop us a question in advance of each week's show, drop us a line. It's mirror.money.saving@mirror.co.uk, or join us live on the day and drop your questions in the comment section below, and we'll try our best to get them all answered. But thank you for joining us, and thank you, Martin, for agreeing to be one of our experts on the panel, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Emma.